Afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started and allow folks to trickle in. We want to make sure that we give as much time to everyone to participate in today's community forum. My name is Jose Bodipo Memba. I'm the chair for the Urban Land Institute for Sacramento. Really excited to have this conversation about Meadowview in the greater South Sacramento area. We're going to be sharing a PowerPoint, but there'll be opportunities for interaction through small groups and some live polling. So we're really looking forward to hearing your perspective in writing and verbally, and also as a part of the small groups. I just want to go through a couple of just housekeeping items as we move forward. Again, we're asking that folks start with their microphones in mute so we can hear the speakers when they talk. We will be doing some breakout groups where Mary Clemente will be putting everyone's basically their boxes, their heads, their computers into different groups to have conversations about some of the topics that we're discussing today. So through that, we definitely want folks to have their microphones off so they can talk and have a conversation. But while we're doing the presentation portion, we're asking that microphones be on the mute. If there's any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat box. If we're going too fast or too slow, there's buttons for that as well, so we can be aware and we can make sure this is as valuable for everyone involved. So in about 25 to 30 seconds, we'll be putting up some master slides to go through. And again, we're really looking forward to listening, hearing, clarifying some priorities, and providing some tools to engage and activate and empower everybody on this call to do what's best for the Meadowview neighborhood. So really looking forward to this call. All right, can you guys still hear me? Thumbs up? Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this is the Urban Land Institute, Sacramento Health and Equity Task Force, really focused on the South Sacramento Meadowview community. We couldn't do any of the work that we're going to be talking about today without the help of our sponsors. We'll talk a little bit more about who ULI is and why we're involved and engaged, but just want to make sure we thank all the sponsors listed here. And we also want to send a special thanks to our city council members, Councilmember Chenier and Councilmember Carr, who've really been supportive and engaging ULI and engaging community members that they serve to ensure that there are opportunities for community-led planning and activation. And that's what we're really going to be focused on today. Also want to send special thanks to Congresswoman Matsui's office, who initially put the seed dollars towards this effort that started back in 2018. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So why are we here? Why is Urban Land Institute talking to folks in the Meadowview community about health and equity? Why is that important? Well, one, I want to just start off with a question and a poll question so folks can give us some feedback, because as we start to talk about community, we really want to understand what it is that you love about your community. And we can talk a little bit about why that's important as to why we're here in a moment. So Mary's going to put the poll question up. If you could respond to that poll. If for some reason you can't get the poll question, put what you love about Meadowview in the chat box. We want to hear what are those key areas that make this neighborhood special to you. And again, if the items that you are looking for aren't listed, write them in the chat box, because whatever makes this community special to you is important. We have about 15 more seconds for the poll. So you can get those in. All right, we're gonna go ahead and end the poll. And what came up actually on this call is very similar to what we heard in a lot of our surveys, is that diversity and culture in the people and feeling of the community really are the things that people love about Meadowview. It's pretty consistent. And so really what we're here is to talk about celebrating and building off of those community assets, and then clarifying our priorities based off of those needs, and then providing some additional tools for engagement, empowerment, and community-led activation. And there's gonna be some more conversation about that. So with that in mind, I'd like to have a special guest, Chinua Rhodes, who is a Meadowview resident, District 8 Parks Commissioner, and actually running for the school board right now, and talk about the importance of community engagement and creating the communities you want. So Chinua, thanks a lot for spending the time. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose. I was like, where did you get that picture from? That was amazing, man. So, yes, my name is Chinua Rhodes. Area. I actually live off of Amherst and 68th, right here. And so, you know, I'm excited to be on the call today. Want to thank Jose again and ULI, any council member or elected official who might be on the call, and my fellow boards, commission, committee folks, and staff. I appreciate you guys, what you guys do every day. But really a big Southside pride to the residents, people who came to the call today that were don't hold any titles but want to see change in their communities. I want to give a really big shout out to you. And keeping in that theme, I would like to say, don't buy into the hype or the myth. And the myth of that you need certain connections, the myth that you need a college degree, the myth that you need to be the wonky or the most articulate person in the space, the myth that you need to be on somebody's board, commission, or committee to be able to make change, an impactful change, and have be a leader in your community. The only prerequisite to have impact or make change in your community really is hard work and a strong commitment to see the areas that you love impacted in a positive way. So that is a marker for anybody who's on this call and our everyday residents here in the city of Sacramento. In the South area, I grew up here in the South area. In the South area, we understand what our deficits are. Oh, and often those deficits are fed to us daily. But in these times, what we have a huge opportunity to do is to refocus on, like Jose said earlier, what we love and what our assets are. We have opportunity to build a people-centered movement built on equity, justice, and once again, what we love. You know, I think one of the things that comes to mind when we work in communities is something that always helps me out on the commission and kind of my North Star is when people have change done to them, it's seen as violence. When people have change done with them, it's seen as their liberation. And so right now, what we need to realize, and what I need everybody on this call to realize, is that change is possible, and we are part of that change. And when I say we are part of that change, your everyday Sacramentan, we are part of that change. And the goal is really to move people through 3 steps. And I like to call it 3 steps when you look at how people engage with our communities. We want to move them from being engaged, involved, empowered. Engaged are people who, you know, they read the stuff on Facebook. They might get some emails and you know, they're up to date on what's happening. And they might talk to their friends and family about it. Engaged would be folks like yourselves that are on the call and talking and wanting to make a difference. And empowered, that step is people like Jose are people that are putting together the information, bringing together people around these subjects, and then taking that actionable step and moving forward to make actionable change in the places and spaces that you love. And so that is what I'm here to push to you guys today, that anybody can make a difference. And the myth and the falsity of the everyday person can't is a lie. And know that we together are the change that we're looking for. So thank you guys very much. Jose, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. Wow, really appreciate that. And again, you're going to hear that word. And again, we really appreciate all the engagement we've received, and fully understand that a lot of folks don't know ULI's mission. And to be really honest, change can be scary. But to Jim's point, we really want to make sure that any change that occur, that it's driven by not me, but by the individuals on this call who live in the neighborhood, who understand, and that the folks on our panel and task force provide the expertise that we have to empower individuals to be their own advocates. So again, our real goal is to make responsible decisions as it relates to land use and create sustaining communities worldwide. ULI has 42,000 members across the world, not just the United States. And again, our goal, we've been in Sacramento for quite a while, but our goal is to be more engaged in all parts of Sacramento, not just downtown, not just the hot spots, but the entire city, and to be a resource. The other piece that I think is important is we've been engaged in South Sacramento since 2018, mentioned before. We had our advisory panel, we produced some reports, and then there's this work that we're doing now that we want to continue to be engaged with the South Sacramento community. And so I'll have Bernadette talk a little bit more about the findings of that advisory panel. But really, that was another effort that involved a number of community members. And while right now we're in COVID times and it's difficult to connect face-to-face, we're hoping that this will also be an opportunity for more of us to be engaged through these webinars and online connections. So I've talked about the task force. Here are just the faces that have been working behind the scenes gathering this information. Some of these folks are folks that you know, some folks you admire, some folks that you've seen in your day-to-day walk, and some experts maybe you haven't seen, but have a real care and concern for everybody on this call in the neighborhoods that they serve. And they'll all have an opportunity to speak today about ways in which they can bring their expertise to walk alongside with each and every one of you. So I talked a little bit about the task force, essentially starting back in 2018. So I want to show you guys a little video that will give you a little bit of history lesson in terms of how this group has been involved in this area and why this conversation is important then and important now.
The reason why ULI is so important is that they have been around the country. They've been to places like Sacramento. Sacramento is special. I don't want to be like any other place. I don't want to be Austin. I don't want to be Portland. This is Sacramento, and we can do it our own way. And you look at the richness of what we have in South Sacramento, along Stockton Boulevard, for instance, and the ethnic delights that have occurred there with the Vietnamese, the Hispanic neighborhoods. We should be able to get to them easily. And that's really part of what we'd like to see in South Sacramento, be able to see the connectivity.
We really wanted to bring the Urban Land Institute to Sacramento because they are national experts in community revitalization around transit stations. The thing that really got our attention for Florin and Meadowview light rail stations is that Regional Transit itself, RT, owns land on both of those stations. It was great that they were involved. They sponsored the panel, and I think they're really taking the panel recommendations very seriously. So the panel comes in and says, my gosh, you have such opportunity here. You know, the sky's the limit limit. If you get the community involved, you can really build something today that will be a pride of the community for years to come. That inspiration and the roadmap that ULI has given us through this panel is, I think it's a critical path forward for the future of those two stations, and it's reinforcing, I think, for the local community that they can actually get high quality development that can bring jobs and healthcare and new housing to Flora and Meadowview.
There's a definite feeling as you talk to the residents and people who work and are very familiar with the area that the area has had things done to it as opposed to with it. So there was a real concern that we would make sure we were careful to really understand what the community interests and needs were, separate from what the marketplace might want to do, given an opportunity to develop inside of the community.
This panel was particularly interesting to me because the neighborhoods that we were looking at are very diverse neighborhoods. Unlike Pittsburgh, where it's relatively, African American residents and their white counterparts, this is actually a more diverse neighborhood, including people from various Asian backgrounds, Hispanic, Latino, and so that's something that I don't work with too often. So it was really exciting to get a chance to actually delve into the cultural aspects that I don't ordinarily see in Pittsburgh.
As part of the 10-Minute Walk campaign, we're excited that Mayor Steinberg signed on and is committed to ensure that all Sacramento residents have a park within a 10-minute walk of their house or home. As such, in looking at the study area this week, we're excited that there's so many great possibilities for parks, trailways, and transit connections within the residents that are currently not being served by a park.
I really feel that when we have a federal investment, we should maximize the use of it. And we have transit-oriented development, which we felt we had stations along the way. We can encourage development not only of housing, but of businesses and anchor institutions there that will feed out into the neighborhoods of South Sacramento. I hope as a result of this study, and I think there's quite a lot of excitement around it because it really is a study that lays out a plan, not imposed upon us, but actually listening to the people who really care the most in those neighborhoods. And to understand that they can get involved in this to see what they would like to see happen here. So when we have some investment coming in, we can actually say, this is what we have here, this is what we'd like to see here, so join us. And I think that is the important aspect of what ULI has done, and I hope will be the starting point for what we're going to be doing in South Sacramento.
So again, thanks to everybody who was a part of that panel. And our goal is, again, to build off of that initial step. So why ULI, why South Sacramento, why Meadowview? You've heard from a lot of different people. Our why is, again, we're committed to equity. We're committed to leveraging what technical expertise we have with the local expertise that each and every one of you have. And we're committed to collaborate. And we really want to make sure we're respecting the past of what has caused the conditions, acting collaboratively right now and taking action, and then really looking to make sure that we're striving for a better future together, and not a better future for other folks, but for the folks that are here now can reap the fruits of their labor. And with that, I would like to pass the next presentation to Dr. Flo Coffer, who's going to speak about the importance of health equity and placemaking. Flo?
Thank you so much, Jose. It really is an honor to be able to have this conversation. And I think it's really important that we ground this in the importance of our environment, because so often when we think about environment and our health, we think about environmental health. And that is certainly one aspect of it. But the truth of the matter is that when we're thinking about public health and when we're thinking about the environment where we live, it has probably the biggest impact who we are, how we live our lives, and our health outcomes. And so first and foremost, it builds on our history. I would be remiss, being here in the aftermath of John Lewis, passing away recently, and not mentioning, the ways in which place has really shaped over time so much of what we see in terms of our current health outcomes. If we're really thinking about, the ways in which the civil rights movement, more recently shaped, equality, was fighting against things like redlining, which is shown on the screen, fighting against, the notion of separate but equal, and really talking about the deplorable conditions that exist when we don't invest. And so we have to certainly think about the ways in which our neighborhoods are shaped by past and current policy. And so our environmental health shapes our health because it builds on our history. It also tells our story. So often the way that neighborhoods have been created not only tell the story of history, but also tell the story of who lives there. What we see there is it really largely explains what people see and value, what people have been told about themselves, and how that is reflected in what those neighborhoods comprise. And so a lot of the story that is told is the story of how people have integrated with one another and also have been influenced by the institutions around them. It reflects our values. Our neighborhoods are both the ways in which we are able to outwardly express what is most important to us, but also it reflects the values of the societies that often make decisions with or for, as previously Chinua, talked about, this idea of, doing things without people is violence. So sometimes the neighborhoods are constructed in ways that reflect the values of other people who've made decisions for a community, and the community is left to respond to them, or is in some ways harmed by them. And then it also guides our experience. So the ways in which the places that we live and move, they shape what we do. I frequently say, if we were all in public, in person, which we can't do right now, and I put cookies out on the table, if we were having a meeting like this, a non-zero number of you would have cookies. And many of you who are trying to cut down on sugar or sweets would go home and you'd beat yourselves up about having, broken that promise or commitment to yourselves. But very few of you would turn around and say, why did that Flo give me cookies in the first place, right? And that's the power of our environment. It shapes whether or not we go outside and walk around. It shapes how we feel about the spaces that we're in based on whether or not they're well maintained, whether or not they have the physical capacities to support us. And so certainly they guide our experience throughout our lives in terms of how we relate to the spaces around us and what we do. And then certainly shaping our personhood, even to how long we live in a space, whether or not there's violence or peace in a neighborhood, what those cultural values are that are expressed among the people who are around us. And so the environment isn't just whether or not we have clean air and clean drinking water, whether or not there's transportation in a community. That's certainly part of the environment, but the environment really shapes how we interact with one another, how we see ourselves, and then ultimately how long we live in this space, which is one of the most important things that we can know in terms of public health. And so that really is the central role of the environment and why it's so crucial that we have input and co-design on it, and that we're really shaping it in a way that leads to the outcomes that we'd like to see.
Thank you, Flo.
And next, I think I'm passing it along to Kendra Reed.
Thank you, Flo, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kendra Macias Reed, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Franklin Neighborhood Development Corporation and a member of the Health and Equity Task Force. So I'd like to start off by giving you a brief overview of what the Health and Equity Task Force goals and deliverables are for this project and for the duration of our task force. So our goal is to shift the focus of planning for the Meadowview community through a health and equity lens. Really, it's focusing on active listening of the neighborhood members and shifting the focus to health and equity. By doing that, we can confront and address deep-rooted structural drivers of inequity, such as poverty, lack of economic and educational opportunity, and a system of governance that has really, again, over the years, limited meaningful participation by these individuals. And so we have our key deliverables. So we hope to achieve this by delivering these key components. The first is development of a community toolkit. The second is the facilitation of a youth-led urban plan for communities session. And the third and last deliverable is the development of community-led site activation projects. If you can go to the next slide, thank you. So next, I would like to discuss our core values and how we plan to incorporate the three deliverables into this process. So the first value is empowerment. And we're hoping to broaden the community's knowledge of existing resources and connections that we have as task force members, while providing an avenue to share ideas about opportunities and improvements. We plan to achieve this by developing a health and equity toolkit that facilitates participatory community engagement and the development of land use policy recommendations for both the City of Sacramento and regional transit related to connectivity, economic development, inclusive site activation, and safety. The second core value is partnerships. So back in March of 2020, we kicked off our first urban plan program at Rosa Parks Elementary School with participants from Burbank High School and others from the community in South Sacramento. This is the first, we're really proud to say that the urban plan, it's the first program of its kind across the nation. And really what Urban Plan is it's a community-led program that brings together public and private entities in one space to have conversations with the community and youth and build relationships. So we are eager to host another Urban Plan workshop in the fall of this year to continue that process of identifying needs and community assets and how to leverage them. The last core value is engagement with the community. So our task force will help activate public participation by exploring land use and site activation techniques through the facilitation of a community-led site activation projects in both the Florin Road and Meadowview road corridors. So we hope that these projects will lead to community-driven improvements in health and equity with the intent to avoid future displacement of existing residents, businesses, and culture. And I really want to emphasize the need to avoid displacement and gentrification. The goal is ultimately to link the places and spaces with residents and people. So to wrap it all up, by leveraging these three priorities and executing our key deliverables, we hope to continue our momentum by leveraging existing assets and creating a pathway for additional opportunities to engage the public. In doing so, we hope to provide community members with the tools necessary to continue to actively participate in the revitalization of their neighborhoods. Now with that, I would like to pass it back to Jose. Thank you.
Thanks, Kendra. And now's the point where we're going to start getting into the feedback sessions. And the first two sessions we'll discuss some key issues, some things we've heard from community members, and then we're going to get into some breakout groups and do some more polling and start hearing from you. But the first thing as relates to community priorities, we want to make sure that folks realize that we aren't starting from scratch. We realize that a number of different organizations have reached out to you and gotten your opinions about what's most important. And what we want to make sure is, as the world has changed, are those priorities still the same, so we can make sure we're bringing the right tools to provide support. So initially, District 8, Councilmember Carr has done a great job of reaching out and providing outlets for individuals to lay out what their concerns are. And you can see on the screen to the left, issues related to jobs, public safety, economic development, quality of housing, art, community projects, and long-term community investment have risen to the top of those community meetings. And the most recent one, right, on February 28th of this year, there's over 150 community members that participated in that meeting and talked about what had been done. But we just want to make sure that these ideas have been thought about in our process. In addition to the work that the council member has done, there's also was the advisory panel that we talked about and you saw the video on. And all of these issues related to housing, employment, entrepreneurship, mobility, transportation, equity, and the rest on the screen were discussed. And with that, I'd like to introduce Bernadette Austin to talk a little bit more about what RT in relation to the community at the Florin Station and Meadowview Station have been discussing as priorities related to the community. Bernadette?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jose. If you want to advance the slide. So folks, what I'm going to put in the chat box is a link to the report that I'm going to be talking about. So that video we watched talked about some of the activities that led into this report. I want to highlight one of my favorite things from that video, which is what the folks who came, the experts who came to listen to the community members and leaders, what they heard was do projects with us, not to us. And so these bullet points highlight what were priorities in, and you can see that there's really a lot of consistent themes. So public health and safety, youth and education, affordable housing, mobility, which is how you move through the community, walking, biking, driving, transit, and improving the quality of life through culture, as well as employment and entrepreneurship, so supporting our small businesses. Next slide. Great. So this particular report did focus on transit-oriented development. So we really looked in depth at 2 of the stations, Meadowview and Florin, and looked at some of the recommendations. So 3 that I'll highlight that I think are particularly pertinent for people who live and work in, otherwise our stakeholders in this area, is really to improve the maintenance and operations. We want to be proud of our stations and also the light rail trains. Also addressing safety. And there are 2 parts to this. One is addressing crime and nuisance behavior, as well as addressing the misperceptions about safety. And third, addressing safety, connectivity, and comfort. So do you feel comfortable walking to and from the train station? Are you comfortable riding your bike? Are there facilities and infrastructure for you to do so? So things that were provided as recommendations. I want to move to the next slide. So this next slide shows some of the recommendations. So a lot of listening happened. There was a lot of listening that happened, and folks who were experts from around the country who aren't from Sacramento provided some of their recommendations based on what they've heard. And so I'll highlight for Florence Station, there's a very small image for you to review, but they recommended some multifamily affordable housing, some market rate, so regular market rents, as well as quite a bit of affordable housing. They also suggested a market. So that was something that they heard from community members. If not a market, maybe it's a daycare center, a restaurant, or a bike shop. And then the third piece was an active plaza. So this is a space to be in. It could be sports fields, it could be open space, and maybe there's an urban farm. For the Meadowview station, one of the recommendations that came there was senior housing, also affordable. There was also a recommendation to look at some what we call community serving or neighborhood serving retail. So where can you go and pick up some things that you will just need, stopping on where you might stop before you head home. And then third piece is a linear park. So think about maybe where you might walk your dog. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about with a linear park, or possibly also urban agriculture. Next slide. And the last piece I'll say, and I'll put in the chat box, is a link to more information about these recommendations. So bearing in mind that the report, the work was done in 2018, the report came out in early 2019, and then in sort of about a year ago, Regional Transit solicited information from prospective developers. So this is an opportunity for you as residents and stakeholders to really weigh in on your perspective. So the link that is provided in the chat box can provide you more information about what applicants need. And if you're interested, I can also share with you information about how to contact Regional Transit to have your voice heard. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Jose.
Thanks, Bernadette. And again, I want to just reemphasize, this is an opportunity where, and our friends at RT are on the call, they're looking for community members to provide input. And this is a situation where if community members don't get involved and don't speak up, this could be a project that doesn't end up the way that you would like to see it. So please, and I think Tracy's on the call, follow the link that Bernadette posted. Lastly, as it relates to priorities, we did the poll earlier on. You guys listed some of the similar priorities that we heard in the poll that we sent out to community members. And we want to thank the City of Sacramento, and specifically Councilmember Chenier's office, Councilmember Carr's office, and the Neighborhood Services Group that got surveys out to everyone in the area. And if you didn't get on that list, let us know, because we want to make sure to get your feedback. But we asked about 8 questions. And the first question had to do with what were the improvement priorities for the overall South Sacramento area. And the number one priority was educational improvement. But then right behind that was safety and crime, and then housing affordability. And then homelessness came up, as did job creation. And small business development also in the job space was something that was a high priority. So this is what we heard from community members as to what your priorities are right now. And this is from March to April. We asked some more specific questions about your feelings about safety, and as Bernadette talked about, there's a kind of an even split, as you guys can see, in terms of some folks feeling somewhat safe and very safe, while others feeling, not so safe. And then something that really popped up as a high number is that access to healthcare was pretty high, 31.82% identifying low access to healthcare, and 22% in the middle, neither high nor low. Other feedback from South Sacramento residents related to job opportunities, and this is a number that really stood out, is that over 60% of the people thought that there was very poor quality of jobs in South Sacramento. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is what can we do from a land use perspective to encourage more job opportunities for the residents that are here right now without gentrifying. And then back to the transportation point that Bernadette discussed, how do we make sure that transit access is available, given that 42% of people thought that the most important mode of transportation is public transit. And in our COVID times, that has become a more tenuous way of getting around. And then the last piece, and we'll talk about this, we did ask, what new job, entertainment, or educational opportunities would you like to see? And it's overwhelmingly clear that education and job opportunities are at the top of the needs list, according to the residents, at least when this survey was put out. And then also some entertainment and recreational opportunities were identified as a high need. But as we know, when this survey went out, we didn't realize we were going to be going through major changes. COVID, the murder of George Floyd, and a number of other issues related to racial tension in our region that didn't just start now, but have been highlighted now. Jobs have been shut down. While we aren't in a recession yet, we've been hit with one of our worst economic cycles in the last 10 years. And so we want to ask you, have your priorities changed based on the impact of all of those issues that I just mentioned and the support that's available? And have your needs changed based on that piece? And so Mary is going to go ahead and put another poll up, because we really want to make sure we understand the priorities. As you've seen, there's 3 sets of data that have some general consensus, but has that changed based off of all the recent impacts that we face? So Mary, if you could put that poll up, please. And for folks who can't use the poll or have other ideas, feel free to also include information in the chat box. We're tracking that because we want to make sure that, one, we share this information back with you, but please feel free to fill in the poll. And I'm going to just change the slide as the poll's still going, but there's some additional topics that are listed here. If folks want to drag it to the side and write some information in the chat box, feel free. We're going to keep the poll going for about 30 more seconds. So please, if you could, make sure you put in your top 3 priorities. We really want to make sure, again, that this is your voice, not our voices. We're going to do about 15 more seconds before we close the poll. And again, if you're having problems with the poll, feel free to write in the chat box. We will track that there as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the polling. And again, if we missed something, please let us know in the chat box. And some interesting numbers that Joanna's going to talk a little bit more about, and we're going to have a chance to talk about when we go into the small groups in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to talk about what are some of the things that are happening in response to those priorities. And Adrian Engel with Fair and Peers is going to start that conversation. Adrian?
Thanks, Jose. So as we are looking at how Meadowview and Florin area and South Sacramento are changing, we wanted to talk about what's actually happening right now, what's been going on. And so I have 3 different slides that broke out different types of projects into 3 categories. And so first, I wanted to talk about, the development that's happening. There's a lot of discussion about the development that's happening downtown and in the core. And some people forget about South Sacramento, but there are projects happening here. And 2 that I wanted to highlight, shown in bold here, are happening on the Meadowview corridor. There's the new Tukoi Porter College Prep charter school that's going to be opening this fall, which I think is a great amenity and reconstruction of an existing site there, as well as the DaVita dialysis business that's recently opened up in a reuse of an existing space along the corridor as well. And so you're starting to see more of those educational opportunities and maybe health services provided as well on the corridor and in the neighborhood. There's also almost 800 units of affordable housing and multifamily housing being built near the corridor as well, although most of these happened further down the blue line towards the Cosumnes River College in District 8 and not on Florin and Meadowview. But it does show that there is a market for new housing down here and a demand for that. And so finding out, based on some of those recommendations we saw from the technical assistance panel on the types of housing projects, both for sort of mixed incomes as well as different demographics on the Florin and Meadowview sites can be important. So again, keeping those in mind as we're looking forward to the development in the community. Go ahead, Jose. The second bullet or second bucket I want to talk about was really looking at what transportation investment is being made into the corridor or the 2 corridors. And I think there's quite a bit that's going on right now, especially on the major arterials that crisscross across the South Sacramento area here. So 24th Street, Mac Road, Meadowview, and Florin are all seeing dynamic complete street projects that will both make it easier to walk and bike, but also make it much easier to access transit on those major arterials that were designed years ago to prioritize cars over other users. So these are all projects that are either in different phases of design or construction, and you'll start seeing things moving forward here. What you don't see are the transportation projects within the neighborhood as much. So those are the kinds of things that we're hoping to hear more about and what areas are missing in the community. We also see that there's quite a bit of transit changes going on with regional transit right now. Besides just looking at the stations themselves, they've done a lot to expand their services to a lot of the different parts of Sacramento. So they started the Smart Ride expansion, where it's like an Uber or Lyft, but it's a small bus that will come pick you up based on an app and then drop you off somewhere within their South Sacramento delivery area. So that's been more usable for different people that maybe couldn't take buses or didn't have their trips lined up with light rail service exactly. And then also the Ride Free RT service, so all youth, kindergarten through 12th grade, can get free bus passes to be able to ride any time of the day and any trip to be able to get around by transit as well. So these things are all moving forward and making this area more accessible and increasing mobility for users. And then finally, the third bucket is really looking at programs. Go ahead, yeah. Are really looking at programs for the homeowners themselves. So in the city, they have programs for chain link fence removal in the front yards and garden conversion to really focus on river-friendly landscaping and creating more green spaces in your own properties and provided through both the city service and the Sacramento Tree Foundation's shade tree program that can help bring in that tree canopy that's so important to make both our houses, our yards, and our sidewalks more comfortable. And then finally, wanted to highlight during these COVID times that SMUD is also having programs to help with late fee forgiveness and no shut-off program in 2020 for people that are struggling with the current circumstances and looking for how these can help homeowners stay in place. With that, Allison Joe's going to talk about some of the other programs that are happening in the region.
Hi, thanks Adrian for handing that off. I also wanted to just highlight a couple of other homeowner and tenant programs, because I think what's also important is not just those who are owning homes, but those who are renting in homes. And I also want to note that the city is doing a lot around its tenant protection and its ordinances to prevent rent gouging and for renters to prevent renters from being forced out of their homes because the rents are too high and being jacked up. And also during COVID times, the emergency eviction moratoriums for commercial and residential tenants, as well as mediation services. So some of it is reactive, but some of it actually had been put in place over the last year or so, policy-wise, to kind of move things forward for everyone and making sure that we all have that opportunity. One of the things I did want to just start just by saying thank you for all of you who are here and taking time out of your day for another session on the computer. And one of the things that I appreciate as Chief of Staff to Councilmember Chenier is really the opportunities to come and talk to people and talk with people and engage people about what their concerns are, about their neighborhoods, about their streets, about their schools, about their parks and their places. And so it means a lot to me to see a lot of people continuing to engage about Meadowview, about Sacramento, because there's just a real effort and intention to what you're doing. So I just wanted to convey my appreciation for all of you for being here. One of the things I and my counterpart in Council District 8 really have spent a lot of time on is the community engagement side of things, and thinking about what's going on, not just in the projects, and here's another streetscape project and a tree planting and a park cleanup, but really what are we doing to actually talk to the community about what needs to happen. And we all know that over the last few years, and the last year or two especially, we've really had the opportunities to have hard conversations and things that we don't and our bosses don't necessarily need to hear, or don't want to hear, but sometimes do need to hear. And so what I wanted to do is at least just call that out, where there's really, what we've been doing lately has been lots and lots of conversations about equity, about opportunity, about action-oriented things and change. And some of that you see here in kind of our things that we have been really talking about. Chinua mentioned Southside Pride, South Sac Pride. We are hearing our community stories more and more. We are hearing the calls for change, and we're hearing them through your passionate voices. And so we are doing that through a number of different ways, through our public places and through through anything that we can to really better understand that. Next, please. And so for me, I see what we've been doing more reflected in the people and in the activities from over the years through the council offices, as well as through others. I wanted to make sure that we noted the Capitol Public Radio efforts around their podcast, Making Meadowview, and kind of the storytelling abilities or the storytelling that has kind of emerged or been uncovered from that work, as well as the stuff that kind of happens from our community centers, places like the Sojourner Truth Museum, and Ms. McDaniels has done a lot of work around just getting young people involved online, in person, and in your face, if you will. And for those kind of opportunities, we just appreciate, and we know that that's how we are going to, again, drive change and drive opportunity and get opportunity to the Meadowview community. Next, please. I'm going to hand it off over to Mr. Bryant and see if and have him kind of go through a couple of the other projects going on.
Well, thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. One of the things that we've been working on is listening to what is it that you want and need in the community. One of the key things that came up when we did our last community meeting was, as you saw on the slide at the opening, folks want to be safe in the community. And to that end, they want to really welcome back those who are being released from incarceration, which kind of caught us by surprise. People say, yes, they need a place to come back to. We want to welcome to the community. And the community said, we also want art. We want to let people know that we have art, culturally to present. And getting back to safety, one of the things that came about as a result of that, and we all understand the shooting of Stephon Clark, that the councilman began to, with others, but he took the lead on revamping our city's use of force policy. That basically said that life is valuable, life is sacrosanct, and we need to change what we're doing. So even before the most recent unfortunate incidents that have occurred, we were working on changing the use of force policy. And that came about as an obvious thing, but also listening to the community about what does it take. And although we've gone to a certain level, is that going to be the end of it? Probably not. But the city has adopted a use of force policy that came about as listening to our residents. The art portion, that many of you know, now we have art along the Florin Road corridor, along the Mack Road corridor, on down the Bruceville Road. And we have another major piece of it coming at 24th and Meadowview, right at the Pinnell Center, a piece of kinetic art. So kind of surprised us, but it was a pleasant surprise. So we worked through that. The other thing that people have said, and it's consistent with, of course, what you've seen, is we need different houses. We need more housing. We need, and for all types. So throughout the district, we have supported efforts and encouraged efforts to do just that. What we have on the table, let me back up just a little bit. When if you go down Meadowview Road, go out to Amherst, and just take Amherst down on John Still. A few years ago, when Councilman Pinnell was in office, there was about 340 new homes built. And the young people in Meadowview started referring to that as New Meadowview, which we thought was kind of exciting. So in further responding to that call, we have projects on the board that will bring more affordable housing in the Meadowview area. If you look at across from the Pinnell Center, adjacent to the Meadowview Apartment, there is a project now that will bring another 39 units that'll be affordable. SHRA is handling that to the Meadowview area. And if you go down 29th and Forum, we have a project in the works that will bring additional affordable housing to the area. I'm going from memory now. I think it's going to be somewhere around like 60 or 70 units. So again, it's listening to the residents and answering the calls. One other thing about safety, I've been at the council for 20 years, 15 under Councilman Pinnell and the last 5 under Larry Carr. And one of the things about perception, reality and perception, is that people have always perceived Meadowview and the South End district as a whole as a very dangerous place. I knew that although there were incidents, sometimes very sad and tragic incidents in my district, that we were not a violent or unsafe district. So we continued to gather the data. When Councilman Carr came in, I said, Councilman, this is simply not true. And I've got the data, we've got the data to prove it. He was skeptical. But if you go back, and it's online, if you go to the SAC Police PD, and we'll forward it to put into the conference here, that if you look at the crime, all crime throughout the district and the city, you will find that Council District 8 is always number 2 or 3 in the least amount of crimes throughout the city. Most people don't believe that until we show them information. Yes, sir.
I'm going to have to just cut you short just because we have the polls ready for the breakout session right now, where we can hear.
Oh, we'll do.
We're going to have some time at the end.
We'll do.
Thanks a lot. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for Matthew and Allison providing that perspective. If you have questions or comments, put them in the box. But Mary has a poll coming out because we're going to send you all in now to get your perspectives on what you just heard. So right now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So folks will get sent into breakout rooms where you have a chance to talk to yourselves and give your feedback on a couple of topics that will be facilitated by our team members. So just hold tight as you get moved into your breakout rooms. Good to see everyone's faces. All right. So as everyone's coming back, again, there's going to be some more opportunity for some feedback and some polling. We're going to talk about asset-based planning and then talk about activation. And we're going to have one more breakout, and then we're going to close things up. We're going to go a little bit faster this time, but let's go ahead and Joanna Mack is going to talk about the assets discussion from the survey and do some polling.
Yes. Yeah. So welcome back, everyone, to the main group, the main room, that is, and session 3. Really quick background, my name is Joanna Mack. I work at a local architecture firm that specializes in quality, affordable housing, and also master planning of mixed income neighborhoods. So I'm really excited to get a deeper dive into how we, as the community, can utilize our existing assets. And so as we've seen from earlier sessions, we want to listen and hear from you guys and see what really makes Meadowview Meadowview. How can we utilize these spaces also in the age of COVID? And so if we reflect back on what we heard from earlier sessions, and we see that residents have told us that the greatest asset to Meadowview is people and community. And that's followed by parks, gathering spaces, and diversity and culture. And I think something that we want to pause is we immediately have these gut reactions and say, I love the people. How is that getting affected now within this age of COVID? And how are these assets that were heavily utilized in the last, before the last 6 months, how has that changed now? And so if we go on to the next slide, the next slide shows images of physical places when we discussed with residents of places that they called out that they loved that reflected the heart of the community, of the Meadowview community. And again, looking at these images, we see in front of us how many of these spaces are now underutilized because of how the way we interact with spaces have drastically changed. So 2 questions I want to pose to you guys right now. The first question is, what are places and things you love about Meadowview? And this is in the context of, we said people, but where do you go to meet these people? Where do you go to gather and experience this diversity? Or where do you see this diversity? And then the other one is, what places, or maybe different places, have you grown to appreciate since the COVID outbreak? And for sake of time, we're gonna have all of those in the chat box answer. And I'll call out a few that I see here. If you aren't quite sure what you want, you can have a guided list of this from this board. So it says in the comment box, list the top 3 features that you love in your community. And below, we've listed some of those: community centers, churches, schools, markets, libraries, parks. I see some people, love our public libraries, African Marketplace, Florin Square, Detroit Life Church. So a lot of these places, how are you guys now using them, or are you using them? And where are you going to meet people? Is it a backyard, or is it, a park that you social distance? So that's the next question I have. So we do. A lot of people, we have someone that says, meet people on Zoom. Yeah, they're shutting down. Right.
Hey, Joanna, in that case, are there places where folks go to get their Wi-Fi in case they need to Zoom in the public space?
Right, that's a good question. Only several friends. Okay. So I think what this really leads to is, I'm going to pass this off to Debbie, but how can we rethink these spaces that were so utilized and loved within the community? How can we leverage, and I know when you say leverage assets, it sounds like we're taking and it's this capitalist thing, but how can we push back up and boost back up these assets that we've had, or utilize other places in order to get community? So I'm going to pass it off to Deborah right now.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm really.
Deborah, can you, 1 second? Someone is drawing on the board. If they could stop that, please. Want to be respectful of what we're presenting here. We will have to shut it down if we have anyone trying to tamper with the slides.
Are you hearing fingernail scratching on a chalkboard? Is that what you're hearing? Or
no, I'm actually seeing someone drawing ink on our slide here, and we need to address that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna stop sharing at this moment. Deborah, if you could go ahead and continue the conversation, just in terms of the assets for a moment as we address this. Apologize, this is just for the security of the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I'm Debbie Odokan, and I'm with the Health Education Council, and I was really struck and encouraged by our conversation in our last breakout group, and I just want to call out something that Ray in our group had mentioned about Meadowview, which really to me exemplified this Meadowview and location pride. You know, he said Meadowview is all about location, 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 and it's a really great place to be, and its proximity to other places is perfect, you know, to get to other parts of the city. I was really struck by the assets and how much of them, really the majority of assets around people and community, around culture and diversity. And the third asset is around parks and public spaces, which tells me that people really want to socially connect and find places to connect. And so we, in talking about assets, we really want to pose a couple questions, encourage you to add to the chat box, and we'll be furthering this conversation in the next breakout room around how do we activate the assets in our community. And if the top assets are around people and diversity and culture and public gathering spaces, in addition to the other assets that were listed, how do we further activate those particular assets to improve our community and improve the neighborhood? I think it was stated earlier that I think we're moving in more robustly into this area or this era of people-centered movements, and in really changing neighborhoods for the better by activating and by listening and working with folks who actually live in neighborhoods and have often for many generations. Also, just another question for us to think about in preparation for the next breakout group is what would help to further activate and leverage all of the assets that have been identified and lift up further the things you love about Meadowview or about your neighborhood? Sometimes there are barriers, if you will, put up that make it difficult to access. I think somebody in our group also said that that sometimes Meadowview or the South might get lost in funding, or things take so long that we're often asked for input, and then it appears that nothing happens. So what are those things that maybe city officials, government officials, nonprofits, service providers, healthcare organizations can do better to change, to really be able to make it easier to activate and leverage assets that exist in our community? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Monica.
We actually have Alan next, Alan Folks.
Yeah, that goes over to me.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Folks. I'm an urban designer, and I'm just a slightly older version than Joanna. she did a great job there talking about the assets. And I want to follow on with that a little bit and just talk a little bit about what we'd like potentially for you guys, if you had to say, there's a lot of great assets in this community, and they're fabulous and terrific. But if I had to sort of think about what additional assets I would like to see, what would they be? And they could be in the areas of housing, and there's different kinds of housing. That could be affordable housing, could be apartments, live, work, senior housing, etc. It could be in the area of green spaces, and green spaces are public spaces, right? So it's not just the parks, but you also start to think about streets, and public streets are extremely important in what they should feel like. So what needs to be done there? Do you need more tree-lined streets? Do we need more urban plazas and gathering spaces? Then there's the area of services. Should we have more things like gyms and recreation centers? Should we have more pharmacies and health services? Perhaps a need for grocery store. And by the way, the Meadowview is large, right? It's a series of neighborhoods within a larger Meadowview community. So some neighborhoods may have some of these services, and some of the neighborhoods may not. So think about particularly where you live and what perhaps is missing from any of these lists. And then finally, transportation options here, looking at bike lanes, looking at places to do traffic calming, looking at places to do rideshare, etc. So if you can just take a look at each of the 4 rows, maybe pick a couple of these, just in the chat box, give us the letters for or names of what you think might be missing. And this is by no means a complete list, so feel free to add to it. And we'll give you a second to do that. Some of those are starting to come in. You can see that now. More green spaces, absolutely. More places for youth, yes. Home ownership opportunities, great. Grocery stores. Okay. All right, maybe Jose, we can flip to the next slide. Okay. Then secondly, the last slide there was about sort of features and elements. Now I want to talk a little bit about programming, and particularly programming in the open spaces. And you can start to think about that around public art. We heard Council Member Carr talk about that, and that could be things that are temporal art, permanent art, could be murals on walls, could be kinetic art, things that are moving, that are in the middle of roadways or at the beginnings of neighborhoods. Celebratory spaces, places where you do sidewalk art, places where you have parades and festival spaces. Food, community gardens, everybody's looking to do more of that now. Food trucks, if you've been to the barn in West Sacramento, you see, they have these food trucks that pull up to the outdoor music venue, very popular. Then there's things like pop-up activities. And we know, again, Councilmember Carr's office is looking to see if they can find one of these sort of drive-to concert events, which are now popping up all over the country in these COVID times. Is that of something that would be valuable to you all? On the recreation side, that could be around active sports, like ball courts, sport fields, etc., or could be things that are more playgroundy, gardens, formal gardens, could be things around creative play like you see in that upper right-hand photo. Fitness, maybe there's places where you just want to have informal fitness classes in the parks. And again, this is a programming thing. This is about trying to schedule something where everybody meets up on a certain time of day and does these kinds of activities. And then the last one there is neighborhood identity. And this is extremely important. There's a lot of really good work that's being done now about trying to capture culture in the way of entrances to neighborhoods. And you can do that through lighting, you can do that through banners and signage and so forth, but it starts to speak to who you are as a race, as a community coming together in this specific location, in this specific place. So we'd like your comment about that. Maybe you can pick 4 or 5 of these you think are extremely important. And if we're missing something, please certainly add that to the chat box. Thank you, Sal. You've come up with a whole, that captured just about all of them there in that comment.
And now we'll give folks about 30 seconds to post, and then we'll pass to Monica, and then we're gonna go right into our feedback session.
Jose, there's one more slide, and I think you should just get to, you can go to that now, I think right now, then we'll get to Monica.
Perfect.
Okay, then finally on this kind of topic of placemaking and where we can do things, we put together just a quick slide here that shows some big opportunity sites potentially in Meadowview, and some of these sites could be things that are happening in sort of the near term. You heard Bernadette talk about the Florin Road RT site, the Meadowview RT site, and what potentially could be happening there around housing and mixed use and parks and so forth. And those are along the right-hand side of that slide in Opportunity Site 1 and Opportunity Site 4. But there are other sites along Florin, other sites along 24th, along Meadowview that could redevelop over time. They're going to be in some of them under private ownership, but we're asking you sort of, if you look at the full spectrum of all these opportunity sites, is there a prioritization that you might have about, gee, I'd like to see that site go early because it could bring these kinds of things to my neighborhood. And it's not that necessarily the city can make things happen tomorrow about some of these sites, but at least if we know what your view of them is, that would be extremely helpful. So we can just fill it in on the chat box a little bit on that, and then Jose, we can head over to Monica.
All right, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Monica Hernandez. I'm a volunteer with ULI, and simply because it was useful in our breakout, I'm gonna reiterate that those of us who are all talking we're here as volunteers with Urban Land Institute, and in our professional lives, all of us work in some way in development, public health, community advocacy, and so we're trying to close the gap between residents and cities and counties and developers in terms of what's coming next in your community. So we talked about that. This group does this nationally. So as Jose mentioned, we've been working with residents since 2018 under ULI, and what we really want to do is help create a template that the city and county is working better for you. So with that, I just want to move on and talk about some community-led activation projects. And just to emphasize that ULI is here, we are here, these volunteers, to help you residents and whomever you can bring to the table to plan these activations in the next 11 and activation. But we want to hear from you first around those priority sites, and that was what Alan was talking about. So there's a few different things here. You can see under an abandoned freeway here, you have a pop-up soccer park, right? In some communities, soccer is the go-to sport. In other communities, it might be baseball. I had spent some time working in North Sac, and there's a massive Highlight group out there that I didn't even know people played Highlight other than in Miami Vice. So next slide, please. So where we are right now is right around this idea phase, your prioritization. We have now 2 years of information, both what we've gathered today in person, but also the previous processes. And we want to figure out how to support these smaller public gatherings. Obviously, there is a COVID lens that we need to consider, but how do we start to demonstrate the community interest in activating on these sites based on what we're hearing. So I'm just gonna share my observations from the breakout and the chat. I heard a ton about parks, youth, Wi-Fi, space, culture, and people. So looking at these vacant sites, what are those kind of areas that, you know what, you might want to elevate them like to the level of the assets you have described. You have described parks. I heard the Pinnell Center, the African Marketplace. What are the things that could happen on these locations that help to elevate and represent? Oh, and I've clearly heard affordable for sale housing, and very curious to hear more around if attached for sale housing is part of that conversation, is a consideration or is welcomed. Things like condos, duplexes, triplexes, etc. So next slide, please. And so we're at this kind of point where we want to be that space between the public agency and the residents, because historically for decades, the cities and counties have not really listened to residents effectively, and that's why we are here and asking you for feedback and your time. And so we will work with the public entities as well so that they understand your priorities and your needs. So when we think about our toolkit, one, it's based on your priorities, and we want to provide you all with the tools, but we also want to create a space where we can help the city and the county be accountable for responding to your requests and needs. Sorry, I know we're over time. I'll stop right there.
All right, folks, we're going to spend a little less time this time, but we're going to do our last breakout. So Mary's going to put folks into rooms so we can get some feedback again about some of the things you ranked with Alan and with Joanna. So enjoy your breakout rooms, and we'll close up with Will, who's here all the way from DC to talk about why ULI at the national level is involved and engaged. Thanks, everybody. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for all your feedback. And you just know we'll be sharing all this stuff afterwards. We're a little over time, but I want to make sure before we close out that we have the opportunity to let Will Herbig, coming from DC, where it is 9:38 p.m., who's been participating in this whole process. It's Will who was nice enough and thoughtful enough to grant us the opportunity to do this work. And I wanted to give Will the floor to talk a little bit about the ULI Healthy Places initiative and why it's so important for ULI to be invested in Sacramento, specifically in South Sacramento and Meadowview. Will?
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, everyone, for your commitment and time tonight. I'm just delighted to be able to spend my evening with you. I wish we were all together in person. It was about a year ago that I had the opportunity to visit South Sac and touch it, feel the neighborhood, and meet with many of you. So I just wish I was there in person. I don't want to keep you longer. You've all talked and heard from a lot of speakers tonight, but the one message that I do want to share is that this effort in South Sac is not operating in a silo. You are actually part of a cohort of 3 other teams across the country that are looking at land use barriers and trying to create better, healthier, more equitable communities. And so these groups include not just Sacramento, but teams in Tampa Bay, Phoenix and Tempe, Arizona, and that's Tampa Bay, Florida, Phoenix and Tempe, Arizona, and also Chicago, Illinois. Together, we are, each team is documenting their stories and their process and coming up with some recommendations for positive change and to possibly a series of policy and practice recommendations to create better, healthier communities. We're gonna pull together the lessons from the 4 teams and actually document those and launch a national synthesis report to tell this collective story of change from across the country. And so the story in South Sac will be shared nationally and hopefully with the desire of inspiring other communities to make improvements and create more healthy and more equitable communities for the better. Just real quickly, just so that you know some of the challenges that are being addressed in the 3 other cities, Chicago is looking at affordable housing. As you know, Chicago, major city, a lot of housing pressures, and they really have narrowed in on accessory dwelling units or granny flats or carriage houses or basement units to allow some relief from the housing pressure within the city of Chicago. Currently, it's illegal to have any of those types of housing. And so they went through a year and a half long process, came up with some key recommendations, and they're working with Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago to adopt an entirely new policy change to allow for accessory dwelling units or those granny flats in individual homes or buildings. In Phoenix and Tempe, they're looking at a whole suite of affordable housing initiatives and creating a toolkit to make it easy to create, to deliver affordable housing within the Sun Valley. And then in Tampa Bay, they're looking at what are the smart things that they need to do and change in their zoning code to create transit-friendly neighborhoods. Right now, Tampa Bay doesn't have a great transit system, but they're looking to build one. They want to make sure that they have the smart zoning in place so that they build compatible buildings where they put in the smart transit. And so Sacramento's story will be added to those to tell this collective story and change. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being a part of this and shaping better communities for tomorrow. So thank you so much. Jose?
Thank you, Will. Really appreciate all your help and support and the resource support you have. So we're getting to the end here. And again, you guys have provided us with a lot of feedback, and we want to make sure that those comments continue to go. We're actually going to be sharing some of this information on Facebook and on YouTube. And so we'll be sharing also all the information we gathered today with everyone who attended. So your sign up information has your emails. We'll make sure you have copies of that and are prepared for the next steps. So what are we doing next? We're going to, again, share this information back with folks, talking about the needs and assets and priorities based on what we heard today compared to the past information. We're going to talk about how we identify community champions to take on this activation and project implementation process. We're going to talk about a toolkit, again, to ensure that the process of getting these projects moving is very clear and understandable, like Monica mentioned before. We're going to work with the city and RT behind the scenes on those potential activation sites that Alan talked about, and we're going to provide some additional urban plan training that Kendra mentioned before for folks in the fall. We started with the youth. We're going to be looking at opening it up to the entire population in small cohorts. And again, we're going to be having a follow-up meeting in August, September to talk about that toolkit and how we move forward. And then we're going to continue to look at more opportunities to partner. And we just discussed, we're going to try to do what we call some remixes of this presentation that will be much shorter and much more focused on just the the breakout sessions, so we can get some more and more information to make sure we gather the real needs of the community. So with that, we're about 10 minutes over. We apologize for keeping you along, but I hope it was worth your time. Thank you to each and every one of you, because it's with you that this community really can reach its maximum potential, and that your kids and grandkids can fully experience and see the fruits of their labor. Thank you so much for your time. If there's more questions, feel free to leave them in the chat box. Again, we are copying everything. We're making sure that we get back to everyone. I hope it was a good use of your evening. Again, we look forward to talking to you in August and September. And thanks again for staying overtime with us.